Freedom Fighter Radio coming to you live from the heart of the Great White North, the heart of the true North, strong and free. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. This is Freedom Fighter Radio coming to you live on a Sunday, May 21, 2023. It's a beautiful day out there, folks. It's never been a better time to be alive, and I am excited to always be connecting with the freedom fighters coast to coast all across Canada, the United States, and our friends from Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. Last time we were live, we were talking about how we need to have a broad view, a zoom out view, to be able to read the signs of the times. We cannot be focused on just the present because whoever controls the present controls the past, and whoever controls the past controls the future. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. This is a Sunday Live, May 21, 2023, Freedom Fighter Radio, coast to coast. Let's get the show started right now. Freedom Fighter Radio, what is up? Whoa!
Shout out to Freedom Fighter Radio. And Joe, you're doing great work, brother, and I love it. All right,
always. Make sure you listen to the Freedom Fighter Radio on Ordinary Show.
I'm on Freedom Fighter Radio on the Ordinary Joe Show. That's quite a mouthful.
Yes. Hey guys, this is Chris Sky. Listen to Freedom Fighter Radio. They're here today, back in the blue, and so am I.
Please consider supporting the OJTV production costs and be an insider member for only $3 a month. Go to patreon.com/OJTV Canada. Thank you for your continued support. Canadians all across the country are sick and tired of the lies, the fear-mongering, and the hate speech they hear from the mainstream media. Download the free radio app, Freedom Fighter Radio. Click the link below, scan our QR code, join our mailing list, and get a free download of our Freedom Fighter Radio app only here on OJTV on The Ordinary Joe Show. It's a beautiful Sunday evening, 6:08 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. This is Freedom Fighter Radio, coast to coast, live from the Eastern Standard Time Zone. It's never been a better time to be alive, folks. And the last time we were live here, we were talking about how it is important for us to have the flexibility to see the signs of the times from a zoom in perspective, also be able to be flexible and alternate it with a zoom out perspective. So what do we mean by that? You know, a lot of our dissidents and the members of our freedom community would like to read the signs of the times and what is up ahead, coming up ahead, by sort of dissecting and analyzing what we see in the news, what the leader of the Conservative Party, what the leader or the Prime Minister is saying, what some of the leaders of industries, such as big tech, big pharma, what are they saying, and we try to sort of stipulate or navigate our way into our freedom journey by reading the signs of the times. But unfortunately, folks, a lot of our listeners and a lot of members of our community would like to tune in on a day to day basis. The emotions involved in freedom fighting, the um, if we can put a scale or a some sort of reader indicator. How are people doing today? How are members of our freedom community doing today? One day, a lot of our freedom community members are up, and the next day, they will be down. It's like a toilet seat going up and down and up and down and up and down. And I guess the reason for that is because we get discouraged when we hear something about in the news that seems to um, about something that a tyrant, a voice of a tyrant, or a policy of a tyrant seems to be moving forward. We feel down, we feel depressed, we feel disappointed. And when we hear something from maybe a voice of someone that we admire and we look up to, a freedom fighter, and it seems like their voice and what their agenda is moving forward, then we feel up for that day. So up and down, like I said, like toilet seats, it never stops. We feel up one day, down the other. And what I can associate that akin to is when I used to play the stock market as a day trader. It's a stressful life, folks, to be sort of having a dog in the fight where you are investing all of your attention and all of your money into a certain stock, right? You would like that stock to perform well, but the stock market, um, something that we all need to understand is a an agency of the secondary market, which means it's by supply and demand or by emotional perception. So it could the stock that you are bidding on or betting on could be up one day, down the other. It doesn't have anything to do with its fundamentals or how the company is performing in the real business world, but it only indicates uh, specifically how the product or the company is performing, the stock of the company is performing in the stock market. Has nothing to do with how the company is performing in the business world or how their products are performing in the market. It's all by perception. Uh, like we say, when I used to work in Bay Street, like we said, every day the market movement is moved by fear and greed. So when we hear bear markets or um, um bear and what's the other one? I forgot. Bull and bear. So the bull market and the bear market um, is always preceded by sentiment. It's all about sentiments. It's all about emotion. Nothing to do with fundamentals. Nothing to do with the health of the company. So to be a sane trader or investor in the market, someone needs to have what we call a investment discipline. And an investment discipline is composed of understanding goals of the client, goals and lifespan. How long can the client stay in the market? How long is his investing lifespan? And also what we call risk assessment. And I would propose to our listeners right now that we also should have some sort of goals and understanding when it comes to our freedom fighting. We should have the technical and the fundamental analysis of what we want to achieve. And when we have identified what we want to achieve and what are the agendas and items of tyranny that we want to overcome or fight against with. Put a goal. How do we want to fight it? How do we want to overcome it? Put a goal, a timeline, and when do we want to see, and have some sort of measurement. For example, if we're saying, the Great Reset seems to be advancing so fast and so wild into our society, it feels like we are powerless and we cannot push back against it. That's all based on emotion. That statement is all based on emotion. Because if we open our eyes, the reality is, in some ways, the Davos Group types, the social engineers, they are advancing in some ways, but in other ways also they are struggling to advance what way they want to roll out into our society. So we have to have a clear idea, or at least clear understanding of how are they actually performing, the enemies of our freedom. How are they performing in our society? And have a sort of a measuring gauge. But at the same time, sometimes it's better not to focus on the enemy. It's better that we focus on ourselves, just like an athlete would train every day, and every single day, the way to enhance and to advance his performance value, or his ability to get prepared for a certain opponent, if he's a prize fighter, even if he's a runner, for example, a marathon or a sprint runner. He knows the goal. He knows the performance level of the opponent, but he cannot do anything. We cannot do anything about the opponent. The only thing we can do is to how to improve our performance as the prize fighter, in the analogy of using an analogy of an athlete. So every day an athlete will go to train, and when he trains, the only measuring stick he could really overcome, or um, the milestones that he can mark in his improvement, is compete against himself. Whatever accomplishment or whatever is his best yesterday, he would try and beat that. His yesterday's best will be broken today, and sometimes it's the only thing we can do. So, folks, the last time I was on here, I realized that it seems to me, it looked like, I realized that, as you know, many of you who are regular listeners of the show, many of you would know that I don't script the show. And I think I should, right? On a certain degree, so that we got some sort of structure, what we want to talk about. I understand the need for that. But there are so much that I ingest and learn on a daily basis. I feel like sometimes all I want to do is really just turn on that microphone and speak on that mic and speak my mind. Because some of the information are so relevant and so important, we need to talk about it today. So I realized that was maybe the flaw of last broadcast, but we have to move on from that. I cannot do anything about previous broadcast that seems to be a failure or a flunk. we can only we can only improve of what we can do on the present. The old saying goes, and this is how I remember it, and this is how I understand it, but I think I might be misquoting it, not verbatim according to what was said. But this is how I understand it, and I will say it from my own words. He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future. This statement, this insight really is very, very much being impressed very strongly in my spirit in these past few days. That's the reason that I feel like, you know what, I don't have a proper script, I don't have a proper show structure, but I just want to talk to you guys. I just want to I just want to share things that I've been learning and some insights that has been being impressed upon yours truly by the Lord. I feel there's no better time than to the present, to turn on that microphone and continue on with the fight, because the enemy is relentless, and we said this many times last year, especially in our Christian podcast. We talk about how the enemies are relentless. The enemies of freedom, the tyrants, the technocrats, the social engineers, they are relentless with their sinister agenda. They're not sleeping. Well, many of them big tech, billionaires and tyrants, those who are the puppet masters at the top, yes, they do sleep because they are very successful in grooming the entire society to parrot their agenda. They have gaslit many members of our society that they know that they have come so far. They know that they were able to, a certain degree, a big milestone in the degree of bringing our society in mass formation. They know that they put in place their sorry, I forgot to do something here. Let me fix that. They put in place in our society algorithms based on our behavior, that they know that in the future, if they want to trigger, for example, another mass formation response to a certain fear trigger. The last 2 years of gaslighting gave them a lot of data. It gave the tyrants, the technocrat, a lot of data in terms of how it was like a beta test. How will society respond? How will society, when triggered, especially with fear, how will society respond again in the future? I think they're very confident with what they saw with the beta testing of masking, for example. Even it doesn't make sense, and even when people who knows how to read or how to have a critical mind, a lot of North Americans know how critical thinking works, but they just refuse to use critical thinking in the last 2 years. So the last 2 years, 2020, 2021, 2022. So I would say 3 years of gaslighting. It gave AI and the tyrants and technocrats a lot of data that they can analyze from data how we would behave in the future. And even before the experimentation of the last 3 years of the early 2020s, even before that, they have already placed what we call, when I was in developmental psychology, there is a property or a method of experimentation to gather data, which was called an SR gathering method. SR stands for stimuli response. So to understand a subject of study and who were the subject of study in those last 3 years, 2020, 21, 22, the subjects were you and I. We were the subjects. In developmental psychology, I learned to gather data from subjects. You want to initiate a data gathering method called SR response or stimuli response. So basically, you trigger certain stimuli, and stimuli could be all kinds of human emotion. It could be fear, it could be happiness, it could be greed, it could be depression, it could be sadness, and all different kinds of emotional stimuli would elicit a response. And when you do that in a mass scale, all across the city, all across a province, all across the nation, and the fact was, it was all across the world when this SR response method was rolled out upon us in 2020, 21, 22. And from that SR triggers, they gathered so much response, what we call big data from humanity. And with the help of artificial intelligence or AI, which remember I talked to you in last summer when I was doing those outdoor podcasts. I was talking about how AI becomes malnourished without big data. Big data is the nourishment. Big data is the diet for AI to work, because AI will only advance if it is ingesting data necessary for what we call machine learning. Machine learning will not move forward without data. That's why it is important, as part of our freedom fighting lifestyle, to always be securing our data. We should not think that, hey, I got nothing to hide. It's my data, it's my own property. And so it's up to me. I got nothing to hide, so I don't care about securing my data. But folks, that attitude is really of much of a coming from an irresponsible kind of mindset, because AI consumes data, and data is abundant, because people think they got nothing to hide. They think of securing their data only for a personal on a personal level. But we humans are created by God to have patterns. Nature have patterns. All of us, um, without knowing, in some sense, although not as strict as, um, we are like those. I'm trying to remember what the name of those birds up in the sky. When you see them, when they fly together, they make many kind of images up in the sky. I think they're called sterling birds or something. It's in the tip of my tongue now. But another good example are these tiny fishes in the ocean, right? Little tiny fishes. I think sardines also behave this way. Not the big sardines, but the tiny little sardines. They move together, and they swarm together. That when you zoom out and you look how they perform, they almost make certain shapes and certain waves that is actually beautiful to the sight. But individually, do you guys think that every single one of those fishes that looks like they're creating a formation altogether as a swarm, or those birds in the sky when they make formation and they make beautiful images up in the sky, when they fly together in the thousands, do you think that individual birds really understand and know what are the position that they have to make to create that image or that formation? I think every individual birds and every individual fish in that kind of formation, they're just responding to their nature, to SR, to stimuli response in their environment. But they are not understanding that their individual behavior is actually causing that massive formation up in the sky. And I think a lot of human beings don't understand that our individual actions and decisions and choices actually creates a reading for the AI when it is ingesting data from the masses. One very good example that you will hear from some city engineers, they said that traffic in big cities, automotive traffic during rush hours. When you have an understanding how traffic behave, you will see that it almost function as one unit, as one mind. It feels like it has a mind of its own. So if you have an understanding, hello Diane, good evening Diane. If you have an understanding how traffic, the patterns of how traffic is formed and how traffic is uh, get started, some of these traffic engineers, they are able to create a mitigation so that they would avoid very very heavy gridlock. Although we are individuals as humans, many of our individual choices, many of our individual decisions for ourselves, um, obliviously, we are not aware of this, but we are actually affecting the the entirety of human behavior. So I'm not saying that we are all hive mind. We are all, um, I'm not saying that we have this kind of swarm mentality. That's not what I'm saying. Folks, don't go away. I'll be right back after these short messages. Just because it's a seller's market, it does not mean that it's not a good time for you, the buyer, to get into your dream home. The seller's market presents a unique opportunity not available during the buyer's market. Find out for yourself. Get the professional advice of an experienced, honest, Christian freedom-loving real estate professional. Call my friend, our sister in the fight for freedom, Madam Cheryl Severance of Century 21 at 905-646-2121, or check out her website at cheryl-severance-c21.ca.
Fund the truth, fund the unacceptable fringe views of the Freedom Fighter radio broadcast. Go to patreon.com/OJTV Canada and also donate $3 per month and help us keep going and pushing back against the lies, the hate, and the fear-mongering of the legacy media. Patreon.com/OJTV Canada. Your $3 per month will help us set fire on the lies of the tyrants, the technocrats, and the internationalist social engineers. Patreon.com/OJTV Canada.
Did you hear about the children's cough syrup shelves? They are mostly empty in the drugstores. Are you concerned? Do you feel the need to stockpile? As the world heads towards uncertainty, with every nation meeting its own challenges, Larks Medical are staged and ready to respond. Go to larksmedical.com. Provide them with your name, phone number, and email, and Larks will respond at their earliest possible availability to find solutions and ensure ample supply for your needs. Or email them directly at info@larksmedical.com. That's info@larksmedical.com.
I'm Pastor Arthur from Calgary, the leader of the Independence Party of Alberta. You are listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio Worldwide podcast, only here on the Ordinary Joe Show.
Immediately out! Immediately go and don't come back.
It's 6:33 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. Welcome back to the show. This is Freedom Fighter Radio, coast to coast to coast, coming to you live from the Eastern Standard Time Zone, coming to you live from the heart of the Great White North, the heart of the true North, strong and free. It's never been a better time when the spirit of freedom, the nationalism, the populism, the dissident voices that cries for freedom in this country, Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, Asian countries, African countries, and Middle Eastern countries are all coming together, understanding their individual rights, that their rights and freedoms are given to them by the Lord, our Creator, and were not provided to us by our governments. Therefore, our governments have no right whatsoever to take away our freedoms of mobility, our freedoms to choose for ourselves, our freedoms of for bodily autonomy, our freedoms to navigate our community. It is an assault to our rights and freedom when certain public areas are restricted from people for no reason, for reason of discrimination, especially discriminating people between vax and non-vax, mask and unmasked, and people who are compliant and non-compliant. So, folks, these past few days, I've been digging deeper on what really is going on in our society, and I've been seeing a pattern again. And this is what I want to talk about because, yes, we are not like the Borg. As human beings, we are not the Borg. We don't all think exactly the same. We are not automatons. We are not swarms of bees and swarms of uh, school fish, school of fishes in the ocean, where when they swim together, you see them making formations that are beautiful. And these birds in the sky, I totally forgot what it's called, what kind of birds they are, but they make formations up in the sky, and it is very beautiful to watch. Shout out to my sister Diane Doucette, freedom fighter, voice in New Brunswick. Shout out to Rick Sandy Sills. Good evening to you. William Garrison. The internet's not working so good today. So, but although we are not swarms and we don't have the hive mind, and we are not automatons, we are not like the Borgs. We are more than that, but we also, I believe, that we have a little bit of it in our nature because we have empathy and we have um, actually intangibles in our human nature. Intuition, for example. Intuition makes us behave in certain ways that we don't understand why we have a certain kind of feeling, a certain kind of intuition. There are many studies about human behavior that is very, very fascinating. That's the reason every time I come to this radio show, I talk about how. Uh, Let me just see my levels here. You guys can hear me out there, right? Just want to make sure that I am not only hearing myself here. There are some studies. I should have wrote it down. I didn't expect that I will talk to you about that today, but there are some studies about human nature and about human um, phenomenon, such as you heard of the Gorgon stare. So, social engineers, this is one of the tools that they use, a Gorgon stare, um, making people feel like they're watched all the time, actually prevents people from exercising their, you know, mobility rights or just to perform according to their personal preference. Gorgon stare. There are also certain studies about human behavior where they have a subject look at somebody from behind, stare at someone from behind, and the subject, the person, doesn't know that he is being stared at. But for some, this is very sensitive, and for some, this it depends on the person. Every person is different, but there are a large number of people when you put them as a subject in an experiment where people from behind or people who from rear view or from a view where they are not aware that they being stared at, even from a distance, when you stare at a person from a distance or from behind, somehow that person that being stared at somehow doesn't feel very comfortable, and that person will start looking at the person staring at him, even though there is no physical reason for him to be notified about someone staring from behind or staring from the side or from a distance. Somehow, we humans, we have some sort of um, a kind of intuition, a kind of a spidey sense, a kind of a sense that is not one of the five senses that we know about. It's not it's not triggered from the sense of eyes or sight, not triggered from the sense of smell, not not triggered from the sense of touch or taste or auditory sense. But if you stare someone, it doesn't work with everyone. It doesn't work with everyone because every person is different in their level of sensitivity to this experiment. But some people are very sensitive. When you stare at them from even from 10 feet apart, or from 20 feet, or from 6 o'clock, exactly right behind them, and you stare at a person, if they're sensitive to this um, kind of property in experiments, in university experiments, university labs, they notice that certain people would all the time turn around and take a look or look around to find who's staring at me, right? It kind of give them a notification somehow, subconsciously, or scientifically. This would be the things that will be offered as an example. It could be something subconscious. It could be something with maybe radio waves, microwave signals that we as humans probably are emitting. There's a lot of explanation that are being offered to explain that kind of phenomenon. I personally think that that is very, very natural because from a Christian perspective and from theology, we learn from the Holy Scripture that we humans, we are not just flesh and blood, but we are spirits. We are spirits, we have a soul, and we live in a body. So as spirit beings, we are very sensitive in the spiritual realm. Let me give you a few more examples. The reason I'm bringing this up, I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about how I can't remember who gave this, but I remember it's one of the Joe Rogan podcasts, actually, I think. But one of the guests was talking about how when they measured, oh, it's one of the yeah, I remember who he is. I can't remember his name. One of the studies they conducted in a certain university, the anxiety level among Americans in a 10-year, and they graph a 10 or 20-year reading of anxiety levels among Americans. And they found out a very interesting and mysterious data reading on how people manifested certain level of stress and anxiety in a 20-year plot. There were 2 points in those plot when Americans show unexplainable free floating anxiety. And I remember that he was saying there were 2 points in the 20-year plot. One is hours before the 9/11 attack in New York. And the other one was just before the lockdowns of the COVID-19 pandemics. So even before those events happened, there were many people who have spoken to their physicians, their mental, psychologists, their counselors, their psychiatrists, that many of these patients were expressing some sort of unexplained anxiety that they were feeling. days or hours before those 2 points in timeline. The first one was during the 9/11 attacks in New York, and the other one was just before the lockdowns, the heavy lockdowns of the pandemics in 2020. That is interesting. And he further explained that, you know, there is a certain sense among the animal kingdom, actually, among ants, birds, bats, insects, and even dogs. Some of these animals, they seem to behave in a certain way, and they can sort of like prophesy or predict when certain natural calamity is about to happen, such as um, a hurricane is about to come, a typhoon. Some of the animals starts migrating away or hiding in caves. Some of the ants would behave certain way, according to scientists. um, Tsunamis, hurricanes, typhoons, and hails, and all kind of um, what do you call twisters? What's the proper name for twisters? Tornadoes. If you are a good reader of animal behavior, many of these experts were saying that they actually exhibit certain kind of behavior, sort of like indicative of something catastrophic or something not even catastrophic, just a typhoon is about to come, a tornado is about to come, a a tsunami is about to come, and these animals are behaving unnaturally or weirdly, mysteriously, in certain ways that they seem to know what is about to happen. And you know what? I'm going to add one more thing that I heard from this person, this podcast guest by Tim Alberino. Actually, I've been listening to a lot of Tim Alberino podcasts lately. This particular guest were saying even earthquakes. Think about that, eh? Animals kind of detecting ahead of time before an earthquake is about to come. That is very interesting because there are no equipment, there are no scientific instrument whatsoever that can predict earthquake days ahead, maybe hours ahead, by using some of this Richter scale analysis. They can probably give people warnings, hours before a big earthquake comes. But I don't remember any incident of any earthquake in any history of the world where people were given warnings ahead of time before the earthquake comes. Tsunami is a little bit more manageable because they get buoys out in the ocean, and when those buoys get disturbed and it gives a certain reading that the computer analyzes as, hey, that's a tsunami coming in. A tsunami can be you know uh, can be retrofit with a early warning device, but an earthquake, that is very hard to determine how, when, and where would an earthquake occur, except if you're a volcanologist and you know that a certain volcano is about to erupt. There are early warning signs among scientists that they can give people who live nearby a volcano. They can give them warning that this volcano seems to be behaving erratically. Maybe it's a good time to move away from the volcano. But they cannot predict exactly when a volcano will erupt. But I think volcanologists can also kind of determine a volcano, because volcano is a complex kind of natural disaster, because a volcano can create a tsunami, a volcano can create an earthquake. And if I was about I think I was about 11 or 12 years old. Let me remember. It was in the early 90s. I think, but I was a young man when the one of the biggest volcano in the world called Mount Pinatubo. I was in the Philippines when this happened. When it erupted, it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we are. I live in growing up in the Philippines. I live in Metro Manila, a cosmopolitan city in Quezon City, within a cosmopolitan city called Metro Manila. But where I lived, where we used to live, is maybe 500 kilometers away or more, if not more. 500 or more kilometers away from Mount Pinatubo. Because I would remember when we were kids, we would, a couple of times when I was just a kid, that my parents or uncles will, go and drive all the way to the what we call the Subic Naval Base or Clark Air Base, which is the biggest military base or naval base, American base outside of the United States, was stationed in the Philippines from the early 40s up to the 90s, early 90s, just before Mount Pinatubo erupted. It was actually Mount Pinatubo who successfully kicked out the Americans from the Philippine territory, because I remember in those days there was a lot of talk in the radio and news about how the Americans were not paying their lease, because they're leasing this very big plot of land in the middle of the Philippines called the Subic Naval Base and the Clark Air Base. Those two naval and military bases, they are the biggest bases, American bases outside of the United States. The Clark and the Subic, compared to some of the homeland military bases, pales in comparison versus the Subic Naval Base that was stationed in the Philippines. Mount Pinatubo is right beside those two bases, Clark Air Base and the Subic Naval Base. It's not so far away from the base, but from Metro Manila, from Philippines, if we want to go to the Clark Air Base, a lot of Metro Manila citizens sometimes from time to time would go and visit Subic Base, because there's a lot of imported products that you can buy for cheap within the base, because technically it's an American territory. You drive in a certain demarcation line, you're already in the United States. Legally, you are in the United States, and some of those American products that Filipinos are very much one of the most colonial mind. We are what we call colonial mentality. The love for American products is just staggering in the Philippines from ever since I was born, because Hollywood is probably, if Hollywood is consumed in America 1,000%, Hollywood is consumed in the Philippines 2,000%. That's how much Filipinos love American Hollywood movies. And so with the Hollywood movies, it's always a product placement for American products. So people are in love in the Philippines to American products. American products are very expensive, but if you go to the bases, there are certain places where you can buy it for cheap. So it would take us hours from Metro Manila to drive to the Subic Naval Base, remembering that maybe a couple of times we did that. So hours and hours, maybe half or more than half a day, like 5-6 hours, you're sitting in the car to go to Clark Air Base or Subic Naval Base. And so that's how far we are from the base. And the base was neighbors to Mount Pinatubo. And when that Mount Pinatubo erupted in the early 90s, I was in Manila. And around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all of a sudden, the entire sky just darkened. It felt like it's 6 o'clock in the evening. We were like, what's going on? It's only 2:30. It's only 3 p.m.
why did the nighttime came so suddenly? Why is it so dark outside? As if it's like 7 p.m. at night, 6 p.m., 7 p.m. It feels like the sun is setting so fast at 2:30 in the afternoon. So we were oblivious to what was going on. So we all went outside. Initially, some of my cousins, I remember, they say, "Wow, it's snowing in the Philippines," because there were these little white flakes that started falling from the sky. Initially, it was white, and then it became black. But initially, for hours, white flakes falling out of the sky, and it was dark like evening at 2:30 in the afternoon. And then we tune into the radio, television to find out what's going on. 2:30 in the afternoon, and it's starting to feel like the sun is setting, or the sun has set. It felt like 7 p.m. And we found out that the Mount Pinatubo, one of the biggest volcano in the world, maybe it's only a few tiers behind Mount St. Helens. It may be 10 tiers away from Mount St. Helens. Mount Pinatubo was one of the biggest volcano in the world. When it erupted, it felt like nighttime. And then snowflakes seems to be landing on the ground. And then I started sneezing because I was asthmatic. Started wheezing. What's going on here? Why is there so much white flakes falling from the sky? And we found out those are called ash falls from the volcano. But you know what's very interesting about that event? Many years later, actually not so many years later, the first time I came to Canada was 1993. And Mount Pinatubo erupted early 90s, maybe 91, 1990. But when the first time I landed in Canada, in Mississauga, Ontario, my half brothers and sisters were already here in Canada. They received us from the airport, took us to their home, get ready for the next day to tour around Canada. Newcomers, right? We are FOBs, fresh off the boat. But because it has not been so long ago when Mount Pinatubo erupted, from the time we arrived in Canada as new migrants, landed migrants, my brothers and sisters were talking about how in Canada during that time, the day when Mount Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines, some of the ash falls came to Mississauga. All the way from the Philippines to Mississauga, Ontario, to Canada. So, that is thousands of miles away, folks. That is crossing across the Pacific Ocean for some of those ash falls to come and fall in Mississauga, Ontario. That is very astonishing for me. But one very important insight also and revelation came from that experience and from that knowledge is that we all live in one planet. The demarcation line of nationality, borders of nationality, borders of ethnicity is irrelevant for these are devices, borders, nation states. These are concepts of human fabrication. Now, I'm not talking and I'm not advocating for borderless countries. I am a conservative and I don't like the idea of opening our borders to just migrants, because illegal migrants to come into our nations. Because this new influx of illegal migrants, and we cannot talk about this in length for this particular episode because it deserves its own episode to talk about this particular subject. But the mass migration that we are experiencing in this last 10 years, Biden trying to open borders southern of the United States to anybody can come. This is the device of the United Nations called replacement migration. Replacement migration is a social engineering device to undermine the integrity and the structure of how this society, North American society, was built by its loving and loyal citizens. Just like there is here in Canada, there is another UN agenda that they're pushing forward here in Canada. They call UNDRIP, or UN, United Nations UNDRIP. United Nations DRIP stands. I can't remember the specific words what the UNDRIP stands for, but basically what that is the United Nations co-opting the natives, the local natives, promising them all kinds of sinister promises to give the land back to the natives and all kinds of sort, or allowing the natives to create some sort of tax so that the Canadian citizens will start paying taxes to the natives. Basically, they're pitting one group of Canadians against another. And how they're doing it, how the United Nations is doing it, they're bribing the natives of our country so that they're inciting greed. Actually, they're trying to incite greed to the natives so that the natives will feel like, hey, we need to be compensated for what we have been taken away from us. And many of those sentiments are true, but this is not the way. But the reason that the United Nations is doing it this way is because they're in the middle of this transaction, and it's a way for the United Nations to grab land, to breach our sovereignty for their own sinister purposes. So I'm not talking about, when I talk about how as humans, and today at church, the pastor was talking about that as well. And there is an authentic perspective on how we are one people. As humanity, we are one. There's an authentic, a spiritual, a Christian perspective, or there are two sides. There is an authentic and a synthetic approach to uniting humanity. Like I said, when Mount Pinatubo erupted early 90s in the Philippines, I was there. And then I migrated a couple years later. I migrated to Canada, and many of my brothers and sisters, half brothers and sisters, were telling me, who were here in Canada already ahead of us when Mount Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines, that they seen some of those ash falls here in Canada. It gave me an insight that we are all one people. We need to look out for one another, regardless of this political structure, legal structure of our own, nation states and identity, national identity. The core values of our humanity is that we're all humans. We are all sons and daughters of Abba Father, and that's my point. But those kinds of natural facts will be co-opted or hijacked by the social engineers, and they would say that, hey, we need to tear down the borders, but for a sinister purpose. And I think I want to, the reason I'm bringing this up also is I want to bring the episode that I broadcasted on Thursday last week. I was talking about zooming in and zooming out. In reading the signs of the times, the current events, the news cycles, a lot of these can tell us what's going on. But we cannot give a very good reading of what the present sinister agenda is driving in, unless we also have a good grasp of the zoom out view of what's going on. The zoom out view is, in my opinion, what I was trying to share last Thursday. Zoom out means we need to know our history, and we also need to have a good grasp of what is happening in the future. Then we can understand what's happening in the present. Because I opened this episode with that old saying. I think it's in 1984, was it, when this was first quoted? He who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future. A lot of our pasts are being wiped clean, are being hidden away, tucked away for us, from us to see. So in human nature, in human facts, there's always the synthetic view and the natural view. And the reason internationalists and globalist cabal are hijacking what is real, what is true, with a synthetic approach to it, is because they have sinister agenda. I'll give you one example before we go to a break, and then I'll see you on the other side of this break. One example I would like to offer for our understanding here on the Freedom Fighter Radio. There is an old saying, an African saying, which is very true, very insightful, and I think we all need to understand the truth behind this old African proverb. But this specific proverb that I'm going to share with you is also been hijacked by the technocrats, the tyrants. The proverbs, the old African proverbs goes like this: it takes a village to raise up a child. It takes a village to raise up a child. So true. So true. And from my own personal experience, I think, I feel like growing up in the Philippines, very close to my extended family, my uncles and my aunts and my grandparents, the extended family model it's much more a rich and healthy environment for little children. And I can see, and I am very sad that I cannot offer the same to my child, because we live in a country that my heritage were not founded. My uncles and my aunts and my extended family are not here. Basically, I'm the only one here from my side of the family. There's actually a little bit more relatives from my wife's side of the family. So my daughter is feeling kind of alone, and I feel sorry for her that she doesn't have the kind of big family I experienced growing up in the Philippines, where, even aside from my uncles and aunts, we also have what we call godfathers and godmothers, where we can go to and, visit during Christmas and be blessed with money and food and new gifts of clothing, of new clothes. She doesn't have that here in Canada, because there's only me from her father's side, and her mom's side there's only a few. But that old African saying, it takes a village to raise up a child, so true from my personal experience. But this truth is also a very insightful and very hardcore truth that is being co-opted and hijacked by the liberals. And they're using this old saying to try and push parents away from their rights over their children in the public school system. In the public school system, they vilify parents. And last Saturday, me and Celine, my daughter, we from time to time, we set aside a movie time together. And last Saturday, we said, okay, let's do a Netflix daddy-daughter bonding time. And I asked her to choose whatever she wants to watch. I end up choosing the movie we were going to watch because she wants to get into some of this Korean teledrama. She started liking many of these Korean, and she's been watching one of these Japanese reality show called Old Enough, where well, it's an I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but check it out. I think she's enjoying that reality series called Old Enough. Japanese kids allowed to walk to school on their own at very, very young age, 3, 4, 5, walking, half a kilometer away from home to go to school on their own. But on Saturday, we end up watching together Boss Baby 2, or I don't know if it's 2 or more than. It's Boss Baby has been a series of movies. I usually always on my toes. Every time me and my daughter have movie time together, usually I'm always on my toes. I know that every time we watch a movie together, right after the movie, I have to sit down and tell her some of the what I find to be brainwashing dogmas that can be watched, especially from Hollywood movies. But to my surprise, this so I would recommend, actually, in one of the episodes next week, I'm going to talk about, and I will endorse, Boss Baby, a family business movie, because it is pro parents. The dogma and the message behind the movie is pro parents, and almost sort of like exposing the narrative of the public schools. And I brought that up during our Mother Day special with one of our Mama Bears. I talk about how even in churches, I feel like the volunteers in the kids ministry, they feel like they have more rights over our children than the parents. There is a very blatant and very sinister agenda in it, pushing parents away from the picture as the primary caregivers of the children and primary authority over making decisions over children. And the teachers and the principals and the third party operatives that infiltrate our public school system, they think that they have more and they should have more authority over our children than the parents. That's the reason we find ourselves in this conundrum with many of our teens being protected by law and by the groomers to mutilate themselves and then regret afterwards their decision because they're too young to make these decisions for themselves. Yet the government is making it a crime against human rights when parents intervene, when parents advise their children against mutilating themselves. We are in an upside down world. This is Canada where we are in today. Like I said, we cannot be up and down in our emotions towards our fight for freedom. We really have to keep our eyes on the prize. It seem like sometimes that they are winning this war, that they're pushing their agenda on us. But if we keep our eyes on the prize, in reality, we are actually winning this fight. Folks, don't go away. On the other side of the break will be our last segment for our Sunday Live. This is Freedom Fighter Radio. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. Don't go away, folks. We will be right back after this very short message.
Canadians all across the country are sick and tired of the lies, the fear-mongering, and the hate speech they hear from the mainstream media. Download the free radio app, Freedom Fighter Radio. Click the link below, scan our QR code, join our mailing list, and get a free download of our Freedom Fighter Radio app only here on OJTV on The Ordinary Joe Show.
Imagine that the power grid was totally wiped by an EMP weapon of an enemy state. Your stress level will go to the roof, your patience will be tried, you will have to think about both your own and your complaining children's survival. If you don't survive, your children won't when they are left on their own. Teach your children how to have the mentality of being survivors through a fun, children-friendly guided outdoor adventures with basic survivor mindfulness integrated in the fun outing activity. Call my friends Ornell and Victoria who are experienced survivors. Call them at 905-252-8009 or email them at northernpacificcottages@gmail.com. Please consider supporting the OJTV production costs and be an insider member for only $3 a month. Go to patreon.com/OJTV Canada. Thank you for your continued support. A disturbing news. Doctors administer certain drugs even after the family have rejected it. Why? Because hospitals can charge $3,000 a pop for it. Meanwhile, they hid the fact that cheaper alternatives are available and it only costs cents. Do you know if you are paying the right price for your current prescription? Have you researched if there are cheaper yet equally effective alternatives? Call Shinlaza Pharmaceuticals at 1-800-206-0051 or email at info@shinlaza.com for a free consultation. Shinlaza Pharmaceuticals is owned and operated by a freedom fighter of the Freedom Community in Ontario.
Hello, friends. I am Derek Sloan, the leader of the Ontario Party. You are listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio Canada podcast, only here on The Ordinary Joe Show.
It's 7:16 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm coming to you live from the heart of the Great White North, the heart of the true North, strong and free, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Shout out to all of our Freedom Fighter listeners all across coast to coast, all across Canada, from the West Coast to the East Coast, from Newfoundland, Labrador, from New Brunswick, from PEI. I'm going to forget some provinces. From Quebec, from Newfoundland, from Nova Scotia, from Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, Alberta, and all from coast to coast to coast. Also, all across the United States, we have listeners from the US, from Canada, from New Zealand and Australia, from the United Kingdom, from Singapore, from Hong Kong. I see the analytics after the fact. Sometimes it doesn't look like we have all of these listeners during the live show. As you know, folks, our listeners are spread all over the world from different time zones. So sometimes those analytics from Rumble, Facebook, YouTube are only coming in, maybe 5 to 7 days later on. But rest assured that we have a lot of brothers and sisters in the fight all across the world that listens to our show. So this is the last segment of the show. I'm not going to take longer because I realize here it's 7:18 Eastern Standard Time and it's about time for me to leave and pick up my wife from work. Tomorrow, I want to talk about the anti-establishment trend that's happening in all areas of society. One of the things that I have been listening to these past days are some of the independent or alternative geologists who are discovering things that many of the establishment geological
Foundation Geological Community are trying to sweep under the rug, because many of these facts, when come to the light, they actually kind of counter narrative the official narrative that many of these geologists, the National Geographics, the what do you call this? I forgot what it's called. But some of the establishment, especially the Vatican as well, they're trying to sweep many of these new discoveries under the rug because it negates some of the purported theories, especially the Darwinian theory of evolution of man, is being challenged by these new discoveries in the archaeological world. But there are certain specific they're not geologists, but so I'll tell you the name: Graham Hancock, and what's the name of the other one? Last name is Carlson. Carlson is a geology enthusiast. He's not a geologist, but there, because he knows how to read some of these geological instruments. And on his podcast, as an enthusiast, he is discovering from many drone footages, patterns that can be seen in the sky. Because we are in the internet world that we live in right now, most people can afford what used to be only deep pocketed geologists can afford. But there are facts that's come into light that blatantly geologists from the mainstream are just ignoring, and some are blatantly trying to sweep under the rug, because many of these findings, many of these facts that are undisputable facts even among geological members of the society, these are facts that come to light, but they just don't want to talk about it. They just don't want to publish it. So check out Graham Hancock. I'm going to talk about how in many spaces in our society, not only in geology, but tomorrow I will specifically talk about geological artifacts that are being unearthed that kind of negates all the Darwinian evolution of man theory. But they're being swept under the rug, being hidden away, sinisterly being, some actually lost their lives for just trying to embark on some of these truths. And we see a pattern that this is happening in the pharmaceutical space, in the medical industrial complex, in military, in robotics, in AI, in big tech. The same pattern that we see, how many of the facts and the truths are being, secreted away by the establishment, companies, and supposedly authority that most of our children trust. Because they are taught in school to trust these brands, to trust this source of information. They are the reputable, quote unquote, reputable source of information. So much like our mainstream media is still being touted in many of our public school system, it should be the only source of information that our children should be consuming. This is a hijacking of the selective knowledge that the tyrants and technocrats want to push down our children's throat. But we are going to fight against it. We are going to expose their lies. We're going to expose their fear mongering. Thank you for tuning in, folks. We are going to continue this again tomorrow. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. This is to be continued. Tomorrow is Victoria Day, but I will pre-record tomorrow's episode tonight after midnight. God bless you all. We'll see you tomorrow. Morning. It's either morning or the afternoon show. God bless you all. This has been Freedom Fighter Radio Sunday Live only here on The Ordinary Joe. We'll see you again next time. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Freedom Fighter Radio, what is up? Whoa!
Shout out to Freedom Fighter Radio. And Joe, you're doing great work, brother, and I love it. All right? Always.
Make sure you listen to the Freedom Fighter Radio on the Ordinary Show.